Hello. Today we're gonna be talking about our AERO 310 Chat GBT project. The title we decided to pick was the 5.3 bomber aircraft. Doing this is me, Carson Stevens, Isaac, and Gunther. So we're the first one. All right. For our question number one, strategic bombing. Was strategic bombing an essential strategy of hastening victory as a military advantage or an egregious ethic violation targeting civil populations? How would the utilitarian and categorical imperative explain the morals and ethics of strategic bombing? So that was our first question that we asked ChatGPT. Um, so ChatGPT responded, the morality and ethics of strategic bombing during the war are complex and have been debated extensively. Different ethical frameworks such as utilitarianism and the categorical imperative offer different perspectives on this issue. So the first perspective, utilitarian perspective, utilitarian evaluations the morality of actions based on the consequences, seeking to maximize overall happiness or utility from the utilitarian standpoint. Proponents argue victory in shortened wars, strategic bombing might have been as it means to hasten victory by weakening the enemy's industrial and military capabilities. In theory, this could reduce the overall duration of the war and therefore minimize overall suffering. And then let's just go to unintended consequences. The actual impact of strategic bombing on civilian populations, environmental often results in significant and prolonged suffering, potentially outweighing and potentially short-term military gains. And then we have the ethical cost benefit analysis. And so in this, critics contend that the ethical cost benefit analysis of strategic bombing may not justify the harm caused to civilian populations and their infrastructure. So now we're going to go on to question number two.
So after this, we got the response from ChatGPT. We felt that it was correct, but it was not very complete. So we used further questions and used the strategic bombing survey. So we said, answer the previous question, knowing that a post-war strategic bombing survey found that strategic bombing eroded citizens' morale. And so ChatGPT gave us the response in two parts. Slide. First was the military perspective, which argued that it weakened the enemy by hampering the war machine of the enemy and hastening victory by reducing opponents' ability to sustain war efforts. It also disrupted supply lines and disrupted enemy's production of resources and transportation of those. And this provided an advantage for the advancing forces. Critics also, however, ChatGPT also gives the critics perspective that it was not very effective and had unintended consequences, as strategic bombing is not known to be specifically effective for certain situations, more of a collateral thing, and it had unintended consequences like civilian casualties, which may outweigh the benefits. It also brings into moral and legal concerns, as it deliberately targets civilian, raises moral, legal questions, and potentially violates the just cause war of principle and international humanitarian law. ChatGPT also looked at the ethical considerations and the impact of the war. It argued that it was necessary for the wartime, as strategic bombing was used as a part of total war to completely destroy the enemy. And it also was a deterrence. It helped to prevent prevention of further conflicts and save lives in the long run, as people didn't want to be attacked. However, the critics of strategic bombing and the ethical concerns are it violates civilians' rights and it deliberately targets civilians. And it also erodes the moral and psychological impact, not just on the citizens, but the warfighters as well. And the highlights of the moral and psychological impact suggest unnecessary suffering to innocent civilians, which is not that good. And so then we further asked ChatGPT to continue further.
This one?
So another, yeah. Another question we asked ChatGPT had to, it was associated with the societal and cultural impact of strategic bombing. And the question we asked was the societal and cultural impact on populations who fell victim to strategic bombings an overall positive or negative? And how does this differ between the local, national, and global scales? So, next slide. ChatGPT responded to that question by breaking it down into three categories: the local, national, and global. And when it was talking about the local impact, its response was, at the local level, the populations in cities subjected to strategic bombings faced immediate and devastating consequences. The destruction of homes, infrastructure, and institutions disrupted daily life. The loss of family members, friends, and neighbors created a profound grief and trauma, and the physical and psychological scars endured by the survivors often had lasting effects on the local communities. And on the national level, the impact was quite complex. While strategic bombings were intended to weaken the enemy's resolve and capacity to wage war, they also had the unintended consequences of fostering a sense of resilience and unity among the civilian populations. The shared experience of suffering and loss could contribute to a collective determination to endure and rebuild. However, this positive aspect often comes at an immense human cost, like thousands of deaths. And on the global scale, the societal and cultural impact of strategic bombings is evident in the post-war world order. The destruction caused by the bombings, particularly the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, contributed to a growing awareness of catastrophic consequences of modern warfare. This awareness influenced substantial international efforts to establish norms and treaties aimed at providing the use of certain weapons like nukes and preventing civilians during armed conflicts. I think there's a slide. Yeah, right there. And its continued response to this question was it was wrapping it up. It was just basically saying strategic bombings caused widespread devastation and civilian suffering, which spurred discussions on the ethics of warfare. This contributed to the development of international humanitarian law aimed to protect civilians during conflicts. The horrors of such bombings influenced the creation of institutions like the United Nations, or the UN. It dedicated to promoting peace and preventing future devastating conflicts. In summary, while immediate impacts were largely negative, the shared trauma fostered resilience, and global repercussions led to the establishment of norms to prevent such events. Yeah, the human cost of strategic bombing remains a somber chapter in the history of warfare. Next slide.
So, in conclusion, we think that strategic bombing is not an ethical decision that military leaders should be making in a time of war. Although it is part of total war and strategic bombing does provide military benefit in turning the tide, we think that it's an unethical approach to win the war. As Curtis LeMay himself said, if Germany and Japan had won the war, I would have been the first soldier executed for war crimes. Although this alone demonstrates the idea that militaries will continuously do anything to win, no matter how sick or deprived. And we think that this came to this conclusion because ChatGPT gave us a pretty informed answer, but didn't give us the perspectives on morale or lacking for feelings and personal experience that individuals experience on an individual level. And that is our conclusion. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.